You're right there, fellow mini painters and lovers of all things old hammer related. Welcome to another video from Nostalgiahammer Hobbies. This video is going to be a little bit different in that instead of doing painting, we are going to be casting some banner poles for the Snakebites that we are doing in an upcoming video. So I hope you enjoy. From watching the videos on how to cast parts, the first thing I think I'm going to do is put on what I believe are called gates, so that you can put the resin into the mould and then it will make the part and it comes out these two ends down here, like that. Now I've used 2mm plastic rod, which I've glued onto the bottom here for it, which is where I'm going to be putting the resin in. And I've used 1mm plastic rod for the ends, where I've just glued them onto the end just with a bit of super glue. And that is just so that it's got a slightly larger channel for the resin to go into to get the part, and some smaller channels for it to escape from, so that you hopefully I'll make sure I fill up the whole of the two-part mould. And as long as you kind of keep them fairly level and flat when you do it, there you go. That's roughly what you'll end up with to begin with. The next stage is to make somewhere to actually put your parts and make your two-part mould from. I'm just going to use a flat bit of Lego to begin with to make the base, with some other Lego bits to make the sides up for it. And when I've done it, I've made it so that it should fit the parts in roughly like that. They may need a bit of a cutting to make them fit, something like that, and they can go next to each other to make sure that your mould is big enough for it, basically just by dry fitting them in there like we would normally do. And then what you want to do is you want to fill in this base part here. Now every video that I've seen says to do it with clay, but I don't have any clay on hand, so I'm going to try it with Play-Doh to see if this works. And it's just a case of filling up the bottom of your mould with the Play-Doh. You want to try and fill it in right up to the edges, and this is so that you can put these parts in it, and it will give a barrier for when you're making the first part of the mould. And just keep putting it in until it's filled up. Now you can do this with any sort of clay, I think, from what I've seen from watching the videos, but you don't want to let the clay go hard, so I'm wondering if this Play-Doh will work. And there we go. That's what it looks like roughly when I've filled it all up. Now you want to try and get this as flat and as smooth as you possibly can. Now what I'm going to use is, I've got this, which I think is a roller for doing printing with. And I'm just going to try and roll this out and try and get it as flat and as smooth as possible, and at the same time get it as level as I can with the edge of this Lego. You want to take your time doing it this way and just keep going over it until you're happy with what you've got. And there you go, that is roughly what you want to try and get, I reckon. You've got a nice flat base, and I've put the first one in. You put it halfway down. Now you can use the mould lines that are actually on the piece you're trying to cast as a bit of a guide for how far down you want to actually put it into the first layer. Now here's one little thing that I'm going to try out, and it's a little tip that I'm thinking hopefully make this easier. What it is I'm going to be using these syringes to actually push the resin into this mould. So I've cut the ends off a couple of them, and what I'm going to do is I am going to put it over the end of this gate that I've got here. And the good thing is, I've noticed, is that this fits nicely over that 2mm bit of plastic rod. Once you've got that on there, line it up with where you want it in your mould. You want to do it so the edge of the exit gate is more towards like touching the part where you want it to exit, and then have your entryway saying towards the end. And you also want to make sure you've got enough space around it to be able to put your keyholes in, so that when you put the two parts of the mould together, it's got something to actually locate it. And when you're doing it, like I said, just carefully push it in to the Play-Doh, and try and follow the existing mould lines that are on the piece that you're trying to cast. Carefully push it into where you want it, roughly. And where you're happy with it. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a silicone sculpting tool and I'm going to push it in gently, like hold the part in place and just press the edges gently in against your part to make sure that it's nice and flush and tight up against it when you do this first part of the mould. Once you've got the parts put into your Play-Doh or clay or whatever it is you're going to be using for this part, next thing you want to do before you start doing anything else is put, they're called keyholes or keyways into it. And I just use the handle of a paintbrush and just sort of twist it into the Play-Doh or like I say clay, whatever you're using. You don't have to go massively deep, just enough so that it creates a sort of a dimple so that when you put the two halves together, they've got somewhere to marry up to make sure they're properly lined up. You should end up with something like that. I might have done a bit too deep with the keyholes, we'll have to see. Next after that is just to build up the sides. Again, I just use Lego, which is what the Lego is absolutely perfect for this. Build up the sides of it. And the good thing with Lego is you can basically make whatever mould size you like. Make it as deep as you want as well. And before you pour any latex in, you want to put something over this to stop it sticking to your parts. You can get mould release, stuff like that, but what I've seen can work is talcum powder. I'm just, I've got that lying around the house because I've got kids. If you've got talcum powder, anyone will do. You don't need a huge amount, so just a tiny bit, and then just sort of spread it around using a fine paintbrush. I'm just going to use a synthetic fine brush like that and just make sure you've got a good coating of it over all your parts, so it will help to stop the latex from sticking. I don't think there is such thing as too much of this to use unless you've got great big lumps of it, really, I guess. You can go in afterwards and blow off any loose bits anyway. It doesn't matter about getting it up on the sides of the Lego because you're going to be pulling that Lego part away later on anyway. Make sure it's in all the little keyway parts, and then it's just a case of blow away the excess however you want to do that. There we go. I'm hoping that should be alright. Now when it comes to mixing up your mould latex, each one might be different, so you want to basically check what the bottles say on how to mix it up. Just want to work out the volume of what you've got and then go from there. Mix it up as per the packet instructions. Do it as carefully as you can, so you don't get you try and get as fewer air bubbles in the mix as possible, because we're doing this without a vacuum chamber to degas it. If you're interested, this 2-part latex I'm using here, we got off Amazon, so it's quite easy to get hold of something like this. And there we go, I've got it all mixed up. And unfortunately, I have got quite a few air bubbles in this, but I'm hoping that they'll rise to the surface and pop as it cures. Now all I'm going to do now is just, not from massively high, but from a little bit of a height, I'm just going to start pouring this latex in around the part. And my aim is to get it up to level with the Lego. Now if you have a mini chef's blowtorch, that can help to pop the bubbles. This particular latex does say that if you put it in the fridge for a while, it helps to slow down the curing process, which gives it time for the bubbles to get to the surface. Whichever latex you are using to make the mould with will have its own instructions with it, and it'll tell you the different curing times. This stuff apparently takes 4 hours to cure, but I've left it overnight just to make sure, because it's in my studio and it's a bit cold and temperature can make a difference. All I've done off camera was cut off some of the overflow, which is just that bit there. So now what we're going to do is find out if this has worked. See how easy it is to get these bits of Lego off, shall we? It doesn't want to come off. Let's try. Yeah, there we go. So some of the latex has got through it, but not too bad. There we go. I can actually just build this round it again, so let's take it all out, take it all apart and see what we've got. Once this has been done and out the mould, we don't need the Play-Doh underneath either. Yeah, there's holes. Okay, now then, see if how this comes off. Obviously you want you want the parts to remain in the latex mould that you're doing. Maybe this is easier to do with clay than it is to do it with Play-Doh. I don't know. So I'm being careful when doing this so as to not pull the parts out of the latex mould. And whilst I'm sort of scraping the Play-Doh or clay off the latex, I'm lightly and gently holding the part in place as well, so I don't want to snag it. And there we go. That's with pretty much all of the Play-Doh removed from the latex, and it's put back into the same mould shape with the Lego blocks. Now, as you can see, there is still a little bit of Play-Doh left actually on the around some, but what I've made sure is that the actual pieces themselves are completely clean and everything is gone. And from here, it is just a case of talcum powder this little lot. Probably gonna really make sure this has got a good layer of talcum powder around the edges of it and everything. Give it a good brush around like before, but gently. I don't want to knock the part, as well as making sure it's all around on the inside of the Lego bits and everything else like that. All the little bubbly bits. And then, very quickly, just blow it all away. And there we go. And I've mixed up the same amount of latex as last time. And now that it's been talcum powdered, let's cross our fingers and see if this goes over. Now it's just a case of playing the waiting game until this lot is cured, and we'll see what we've got. Once again, I left this overnight to cure, and now I've taken away the Lego surround, and what we're left with is the two parts of the latex mould. Now let's see if we can actually split these apart. At this stage, it doesn't matter if the gates that we glued on come apart either. And there we go. It looks as though the detail is all in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my knife to try and clean up some of these edges a little bit. I mean, that's just where it's getting stuck in. And that seems alright. Let's try and clean this out. I mean, it looks okay. Obviously, the question is, does it work? They seem to go together alright. There you go. Pop. That's the whole point of the keyholes. That's where it's going in. So I'm going to use my knife here to clean this off. Again, it just has to be big enough to let the actual syringe in. That is the syringe I'm going to be using. Wedge it in, and then just burge in. There, seems to go in. Yeah. And the next part on there is to try and use this and see if we can create our own banners. Before I actually show you the casting process, I'm going to show you a little snag that I've run into. And that is, when I made the mould, you go, if you look, it shows up on here. That little bit there on the snake's head doesn't quite fill up with resin when I inject it in, which I found with there, where it's got a little bubble just at the end of its nose, and the same on the first one that I did. I have thought of a way of working around this, which I am going to show you. And hopefully this works, but a way that you could have got around it is by putting another gate on the end of his nose, so when it filled up, it would let the air out. Now here are the moulds that I'm going to be doing this with. And the resin that I'm using is just normal UV resin. I got it off Amazon, I believe, or eBay. I've had it for quite a while. I've also used the stuff that my missus uses for doing nail art. It's just ordinary UV resin. And it's a little bit cheaper than anything like the green stuff one. It seems to work fairly well. When you are going to fill these two parts up, because they're only latex, they're quite flexible when you sandwich them together. So I have two bits of hard XPS foam. You can do this with two thin bits of ply as well if you want, the same sort of size. And I just have a syringe and two clamps that I'm going to use to hold it together. And you want to do this in a darker room with no UV light or with no sunshine in it, because this is UV resin. And then to begin with, what I'm going to do is draw it up into my syringe, okay? And to try and avoid that little bubble, where it's got the end which is just there, where I'm having that trouble, I'm going to try and put a little bit in there and see an air bubble disappearing as it goes in. Doesn't matter if you get any in the middle sort of thing. There we go, so we've done that. Then very quickly put the two parts together. Where you've done those keyholes, they go together quite nicely like that. Then put them in between the bits of hard polystyrene. Helps to have a little bit of a lip, and I will show you why for doing this. And clamp them on, not so tight that you really squish the latex mould, but tight enough to really hold it in place. Now then, with that, I'm gonna splurge it into the end there, and then force it in, but do it kind of slow. So you want it to get all the way through the actual mould that you've got. And if you have a quick look on the other side, you should see whether it's coming out, which it is. There we go. Then I'm very quickly going to turn around and do this on the other one. Helps if you don't have air bubbles in your syringe. Sometimes it might be a little bit hard to avoid, but try not to get too many of them in there. There we go. And now, because they're latex, because the latex is clear, make sure it's gone through. It has. What we can now do is take a UV torch and just sort of shine it on there for a little bit. And that will help it to cure whilst it's still in the mould. And where this latex we've made the moulding from isn't fully transparent, it is semi-translucent, so it will let some of the UV light through. And all you need is enough of it to get through just to partially cure what you've got in the mould. And you can turn it round once you've done that side and shine the light through. Helps if you put something down, some plastic down or something like that when you're doing this. I'm using my cutting mat, so it doesn't matter if a bit gets through. And with this UV resin, where it's on a cutting mat, you can just cure it with the torch and then kind of snap it off your cutting mats. What I'm also going to do is turn it around and do it from the sides and sort of press it onto it so that it helps to go through it a bit better like that. And there you go, that's enough to have cured it, so it's there. And then you can simply crack these off and take one part off, pop it down on your desk. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the torch back on it to sort of shine through there and still help it to cure a bit more. And I'm going to leave that for about 3 minutes or so. So let's crack this mould and see how it's worked. They look all right. What you can do if you want to, before you start trying to crack them out of the moulds, just to be doubly sore, is to give them an extra blast with the UV torch. Okay, now then, see if we can take these out of the mould, shall we? I've not noticed that these are particularly brittle, but it does pay to try and be careful with it when you do, just in case. I don't actually see a bubble in the end of the snake's nose this time either. Maybe a little one there. These look all right. Now, after doing this, I have another step when it comes to curing them. To finish off the curing with it, when you've used UV resin, I recommend getting one of these, which is a nail lamp. And it's just a UV light. You can get some with mirrored bottom as well. This doesn't have one. I've just got a mirrored sheet that I put underneath it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my banner poles, pop them inside and then turn it on. And then just leave them in there. Give them a couple of cycles in it to really cure. And we'll let them run through that a few times and then we'll come back. Once they're all cured up, but before you try and clean any of the flashing off from them, a little tip for you I've got is to prime them up first. For that, personally, all I'm going to use is my grey high coat car body primer that I normally use. You can use any primer that you would like, and this just makes it a bit easier to see any of the flashing that is on these casts. And here they are, all primed up. This one with the 2 bones on it, I've already cleaned up from all its mould lines that have shown up when it was primed. And it actually looks really good. I'm very pleased with it. There's plenty of detail come through on the little totem as well. And here on the snake one, you can see where it needs to be cleaned up, which I'm going to do in a second. You can also see in the end there is still a slight little bit of an air bubble. But if you compare it to my first 2 attempts, there and there, the air bubble is nowhere near as egregious. But I think a little bit of filling in will be fine. To clean these off, I'm just going to use an ordinary craft knife or modelling knife, because this UV resin is nice and solid and it's quite easy to scrape and cut away. And I've not noticed that these parts are particularly brittle. And the point of priming these up, first of all, is where this UV resin is clear, it can be a bit difficult to see where the mould lines are. And priming it up will help those lines to stand out a bit and make it easier to spot and remove. Now, I have said that it's not particularly brittle or bendy, but it's always a good idea to try and support it a bit with your finger when you're scraping this. Basically, if you can, think of it as a plastic part that GW produce. And those ones, as you know, you always have to be a little bit careful with them so they don't break. And this is what I'm going to use to fill it in. So Vallejo's plastic putty. And for a part this small, you can just pop this little cap off here, use your craft knife and just take a small amount out on the end of your blade with the craft knife like that. And then in the little hole that we got, just fill it over. And then once that is cured, we can re-prime it and have a final look at the pieces. And there they are, all both finished up. As you can see, that the end of his mouth there, it was filled in, now looks pretty much spot on. So there's no issues there at all, and the rest of it looks great. You can even see the detailing on the back of the snake's neck. I'm really quite pleased with on this. And now these two banner poles are ready to go on a pair of Snakebite orcs, ready to complete them off, which you will see very, very soon. And there we go. That's the banner poles all finished and cast up. Now I hope you found this video interesting and useful for anything that you might want to do in the future. This can work equally well for things like bolters, shoulder pads, or other weapons that you might want to do for your 40k troops, like Space Marines or anything else like that. There is going to be an upcoming video very, very soon where we're actually painting up the Snakebite Boar Boy riders themselves. So stay tuned for that. I'd just like to say thank you very much for your attention. Stay smiling and keep the old hammer alive.